our network isn't really fit for purpose for people who live beyond, the city core, essentially. It's not convenient. We're kind of missing a vision for public transport. You need projects, but what we're saying is, how does it all tie together?
In today's podcast, we dive into something that affects pretty much everyone living in Greater Brisbane, public transport. In my conversation with Transport and Infrastructure Advisor Tim Mitchell, we discuss whether public transport in Greater Brisbane is actually getting better, what we're getting right and what we're getting wrong, whether Brisbane Metro and Cross River Rail will live up to expectations, what needs to happen before the 2032 Olympics, and whether our region can realistically keep moving as the population continues to grow. Whether you're someone who catches public transport every day, someone who never uses it, or someone who's just frustrated sitting in traffic, I think you'll find this short chat to be an interesting one. This podcast is supported by YB Painting Services, who are offering an exclusive discount to viewers and listeners, but we'll get to that later. Let's jump into my chat with Tim. Thanks for joining me for this podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I'll get you to introduce yourself first.
Yeah, so my name's Tim Mitchell. I'm the Transport and Infrastructure Advisor at RACQ.
People may wonder, why am I talking to someone from RACQ about public transport? Isn't RACQ just about motoring?
Yeah, look, historically, yes, that was how RACQ came about, the Automobile Club. Since then, we've really, migrated into more of mobility focused. And so we're very cognizant of the fact that in terms of movability and movement for our members, it's more than just the automobile. And particularly for areas like Southeast Queensland, where it's so important that we need to move around, we have to be aware of more than just the motor vehicle.
Yeah. Is Greater Brisbane somewhere where people can realistically expect to be able to get around just using public transport?
Look, I think it's one of those, the answer is depends where you live, unfortunately. So if you're fortunate enough to live near a rail line or a busway or a good bus service, then absolutely. I think you do have the ability to move around. If, unfortunately, you live in an outer suburb that doesn't have good access to public transport, like a bus or rail, then it's going to be very difficult.
Is there anything we're getting right when it comes to public transport in Greater Brisbane?
Yes, we are. So the introduction of the Brisbane Metro is a really good example of something we're doing right. I'd say there's been a lot of investment lately in the planning of public transport, so rail and busways, which was good. So like metro expansion. We've got Cross River Rail coming online soon, which is going to be great because it's going to unlock capacity across the river and into the rail network. So yes, there are some good examples of what we're getting right.
So let's look at the metro specifically, and then we'll come to Cross River Rail a bit later. Are we fully leveraging all of the benefits that the metro can bring? Because they're saying that, okay, the metro is going to, we've got that trunk and feeder model where everything's feeding into the trunk, being the busways. Are we currently making the most of that with the rest of the bus network?
Not yet. Is the simple answer. So I think it's great that there's business cases underway to extend metro on what you'd call already known corridors. So the Southeast Busway through to Logan, the Northern Busway. There's talk about the Eastern Busway, which I think is a little bit tricky. So that's great. But I think what we really need to do is take the metro and see how we can leverage it across Southeast Queensland. And so what I mean by that is we've got this concept we're calling the Metro Glider. And so what that is a smaller version of the metro. So metro vehicle is a double articulated bus. The Metro Glider is a single articulated. And a great example of one that's already in operation is in Belfast. It's called the Belfast Glider. And what that does, it enables, an integration between the metro running that trunk service, as you mentioned, but having a Metro Glider, which is the next tier down, and really that higher tier feeder service. And the beauty of that vehicle, the Metro Glider, is that it can operate in mixed traffic. So you're not, I guess, beholden by having a dedicated busway like the Metro. And so something like that, we feel as though would unlock the bus network for Southeast Queensland. So just beyond Brisbane City, but we're talking about, Ipswich, Logan, Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast. So, we think that concept can go beyond what we're currently looking at.
Are things with the public transport in general, are they getting better, or are the challenges actually increasing faster than we're able to respond? Like, where's the balance set?
Yeah, well, look, I think genuinely the population growth where it's occurring is making the challenges harder, because what we're seeing, or what we're not seeing, is that greater investment where growth's occurring. So you think about all the new major developments coming online. So you've got Ripley Valley, you've got Warraba, Caboolture West, Jimboomba, Yarrabilba. So you've got some massive growth happening outside of, I guess, the core Brisbane city, but we're not seeing the type of infrastructure or public transport infrastructure that's really going to make a difference on how people choose to travel. And I guess that's the key thing, right? So what you really need is the upfront investment into the network that enables people to have that choice of travel when they move in, not 5-10 years later when they've already, have their routine on how they get around. You really need to have it up front to really encourage people to make those choices, and I guess enable people to make those choices.
Do you think we should be building our cities and designing our cities and where we build based on the existing public transport that we have, or do we need to be focusing more on extending the existing public transport to the areas where we're building?
Yeah, I think two-pronged approach, right? So I think where public transport exists presents a really good opportunity to, increase density, so have more people living there. Not like super high density, but even the concept they had a few years ago about gentle density. So, 3 to 5 stories, which can occur in suburbs, which can it maximize people's access to good public transport that already exists. But conversely, with the growth occurring, we need to really, I guess, appreciate and understand that public transport is a core aspect of land use planning. And so if you do one without the other, and typically we do land use planning first and transport's kind of, we need to do something, but we'll get there. It misses the mark, right? And we really need to design them both together to, I guess, achieve the ability to deliver it in a timely fashion. But also, if you do it together, you can create spaces where you create that amenity and, really encourage people to live in those areas. And, that's what you want. You want the high amenity aspect, so people actually want to be around like those places, which is a key thing. So it's a mix, right? Growth's going to occur. We've got to accept that, especially in Southeast Queensland where we're experiencing massive growth, but we need to deliver the infrastructure to, I guess, enable our livability factor.
So I guess this is a pretty big question, but what things are we not necessarily getting right in how we're approaching public transport, or at least what could be massively improved?
Two things, I reckon. So the first is investment. And so I mentioned we've got some good things on the boil, but so last year, Q-Trip, are you familiar with Q-Trip, the TMR, the investment program? So for buses in particular, that was below the amount of active transport. So I think the road network was like 25 billion for a 5-year program. Rail had 19 billion, which included the faster rail and projects like that. The bus network had 229 million or 227, and active transport had 229. So that factor alone, I think, kind of speaks volumes of what we're not quite getting right. And the reason for that, what we see is that the bus network is really our best opportunity to have a high quality public transport service in Southeast Queensland over the shorter term. And the reason for that is because how we've grown, or I guess how our population growth has occurred in this part of the world, has really been from essentially the 1960s onwards. And at that point in time, car was king. And so we've really developed, or we've really grown to enable cars being the main mode of transport. Subsequently, what that means is that it's super difficult for us to, I guess, design and deliver rail, because it's a very, conflicted and competing space, and rail takes a long time to plan and deliver. I think you're looking about a 20-year headway from inception to delivery. In the meantime, we think buses are the best opportunity because the network's there. Yes, there requires some investment, but not like the massive amount of investment compared to, rail and light rail, essentially. So there's that element. The second one I would talk to is that we're kind of missing a vision for public transport. And so what we tend to see, we see a lot of projects being announced, and we've got this fetish for projects, in this part of the world where we'll just say, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And that's great, you need projects. But what we're saying is, how's it all tie together? So, we're talking about let's just say, Southeast Freeway. The Southeast Busway. That's great. We've got the Metro. What are we doing to leverage the Metro into the whole network? So how are we looking at how the bus network currently operates to actually utilize this, opportunity for a trunk and feeder system to enable it to occur? That's the sort of vision that we would like to see being vocalized by the government, to say, this is how we're moving into an optimal transport system or public transport system.
A quick break to give a shout out to the sponsor of this podcast, YB Painting Services. They recently picked up 2 first and 3 second place awards at the Master Painters Australia Queensland Awards for 2025, which gives you an idea of the standard they're working at. They offer fixed pricing and a 5-year warranty on their work, so you know exactly what you're getting up front. You can claim an exclusive 10% discount by scanning the QR code on screen or visiting ybpainting.com.au/TBC-podcast. There's also a link in the podcast description. But let's get back to the chat. How does the situation with public transport vary from area to area? Because obviously Greater Brisbane is absolutely massive. Even the Brisbane LGA itself is abnormally large, but considering that whole area, what are the trends when it comes to certain areas being well served or underserved, overserved, whatever?
I think it shows that if you have access to good public transport, you're going to use it. And so if you don't, you pretty much have 2 choices: drive to where you want to go or drive to public transport. An example is, so on the north side, you'll see people, anecdotally, of course, but people will drive from, say, the city of Moreton, will drive to an inner north train station and then catch a train to work, when in reality, they should travel to their closest train station to where they live and jump on a train or whatever. And I think it speaks volumes as to say, well, our network isn't really fit for purpose for people who live beyond, the city core, essentially. It's not convenient. I guess that speaks volumes, right, for how people choose to travel. And then if you take, you transport black holes and vacuums on the network. So the Northwest Corridor or the Western areas, it's really limiting of how people can choose to get around. And, it more often than not just results in more congestion, or what I call avoidable congestion. So by that, I mean it's the type of trips that should be able to be used by another form of transport. So you think someone commuting into the city or inner city, they're the type of trips that you should be able to use public transport or active transport as a travel mode. But if you don't have that choice, you're going to be in your vehicle. And what that does is just creates more congestion for people who don't have that choice. They might be going to an outer suburb, they might not be going into the inner city suburb like to work. And like that's kind of an unavoidable trip, right? So like tradies, logistics, freight, like they're the sorts of movements where they need a vehicle to get around. And so they need the network to be working as best as it can to enable their journeys to be as efficient as possible. But if they're getting caught in congestion, which is avoidable, then it's impacting the whole network, right?
And we seem to have this, there's a lot of the focus seems to be on getting people into and out of the city centre. Is that how most people are travelling? Like, are you across the figures on how people are travelling within Greater Brisbane?
That is a good question. And so we did some research last year with Griffith University and about the labour market. And so what it showed is that since the 60s, 70s, Southeast Queensland's labour market has become more skilled. And so what that means is that, from essentially like a high school equivalent certificate, now it tends to be more of degree above is like the general workforce. So, but also the development of the industrial sector has also becoming more specialised. And so you're still seeing a greater pool of more specialised workforce into the inner city, but you're also seeing almost an increasingly stronger pool of specialised workers into the industrial sector. And so there's two things. So movements into the city should be prioritised. So active transport and public transport should be the main priority for those movements. For the I guess orbital movements, so around and away from the city, that's where greater investment should occur, essentially into the road network. So you want those movements, which are predominantly done by vehicle or private vehicle, to have the best journey possible. But for the inner city and the, I guess, high employment or employment dense nodes, it really needs to be public and active transport. So, and also, I guess, just to finish that, what we're also seeing is that, typically people that lived in the inner areas of the city, they're also getting pulled towards those industrial precincts as well. So you are seeing, I guess, the predominance of those areas becoming, I guess, more of a factor in how people move.
Okay, so Metro we've talked about. Cross River Rail, we haven't gone into that much detail. So how do you see that changing the way that people travel in Brisbane?
Yeah, I mean, it will enable people who use rail to have a different choice, right? To get into, I guess, the city or make how they choose to travel, but it will create better redundancy in the rail network. So, for whatever reason, if there's an issue on one of the lines, rather than having the whole network shut down across the river, it creates a different avenue for people to travel. So it unlocks capacity in the network, so more trains can move more frequently, but also creates that redundancy factor. And also, I think what it does by having a new station on the eastern side of the city, it just creates another opportunity to unlock, I guess, the productivity aspect of this part of the city.
Now, you said that buses are great for short-term solutions, but do you feel that we should still be looking to expanding the rail network, or do you think that would not be worthwhile?
No, absolutely. So typically so Southeast Queensland, Brisbane, we're about 20 years behind Sydney in terms of population. And so if you think 20 years from now, we're going to be roughly where Sydney is today. And so Sydney's, just opened up their metro lines. And so if we really want to create a city that is livable and people can move as freely as possible and avoids congestion that totally makes it a dysfunctional area, then we absolutely need to start planning for rail, and we absolutely need to start having these discussions and this bold vision of what that sort of rail network that Sydney's doing today, even Melbourne's done their metro, of what that can do for Brisbane. So rail, absolutely. And even going back to, historically, that's the one thing that Brisbane doesn't have compared to Sydney and Melbourne is a comprehensive rail network in comparison. So, because they grew at a much earlier time than Brisbane, they had to develop their network to move people, their rail network. Brisbane didn't have that, so we have a much smaller rail network in comparison. So we've got a fair bit to catch up on, but we also absolutely need to plan for the future.
Yeah. And I guess the elephant in the room is the Olympics. With the trajectory that we're on at the moment, do you think that we'll actually be able to deal with an event of that size, with that many people coming in and moving around the city?
Yes. So I'm not particularly concerned about the Olympics and how that's managed. I think the biggest threat or challenge that we have is the legacy aspects. So are we going to have the transport, projects that were promised in time of the Olympics? But then I guess the key thing for us is beyond the Olympics is, the vision for transport for the region. So I think the Olympics is a really good short-term milestone to leverage for funding and delivery of key projects, but that's not the finish line, right? That's just a hurdle in the path we're going on. So we've got the Olympics in a short term, but beyond that, the growth's not going to stop, and we need to continue planning and delivering for what the vision or what the future of this region is going to look like beyond the Olympics.
And that's what they said when they originally put in the application, is that this is a way for us to leverage the event to get the infrastructure that we need for the area, for the region. Do you think that they've been making the most of that? Have we been living up to that?
I would say that it's been, I think, when decision making's delayed or deferred, it doesn't save costs and it reduces the time. So I think there's still time to deliver projects needed, for the Olympics, and legacy projects in terms of, the bus infrastructure and active transport, so the pathways, they absolutely can be done in time. Beyond that, I think if we get the planning done and a dedicated program, we can still achieve, those projects. Time's growing short. I think it's not so much a question about, funding and that. It's more about the capability to deliver, because there's such a big program. It's just about finding the workforce that can actually deliver it in time is going to be the challenge now.
And with our pretty, low population density relative to most other places, apart from maybe Darwin,
Perth,
and the massive size of the area, is it possible even to have reliable public transport, frequent reliable public transport in all parts of the area, or is that just not a realistic goal?
I think it's realistic. Perth's a good example. So Perth has a lower density than Southeast Queensland and Brisbane, and they have a greater patronage rates than we do. And so I think what we need, so we need rail, bus, and, being more integrated as networks. So what we see a lot now are those two modes essentially competing with each other. So you'll see, there'll be buses from the city of Moreton that effectively run along a rail line, into the city. And I guess you have to kind of question why. So I think if we actually looked to integrate rail and bus better, then we could actually have a system that can be optimized, I suppose is the best way to say it. And so I think, with Perth, they do that quite well. So they have, rail and bus integrated, they have stations where the two modes are connecting to each other. And I think that's one aspect that we haven't really done particularly well to date.
Why do you think that is? That we haven't been able to?
I think we have, multiple agencies being responsible for different aspects. Traditionally, they haven't really sung from the same hymn sheet, I suppose. South Bank, you've got a busway and a train station next door to each other that you can't access. You have to go around the street. And so it's really those sorts of decisions, decision making, for whatever reason, is it the governance of it has made it particularly challenging. So, look, I think in the past, our position has been for a single public transport authority. Perth has one. And so I think if you were to create a system where those decisions were made, together, then you would get a better outcome. With how the bus contract areas, so declared contract areas, are set up between LGAs, there's no integration. So you have, buses from Logan coming into Brisbane, buses from each LGA on their own routes, rather than, having a one network approach. They have, multiple contracts doing multiple things, which I guess creates this overlap and inefficiencies.
What are some of the challenges that result from our political system and our political culture when it comes to public transport?
Well, I guess the political cycle is quite short term, isn't it? So 3-4 year cycles makes it very difficult to have a dedicated longer term program. And that's what you need for public transport. So, in the infrastructure world, 3 years is a blink of an eye, unfortunately. So, when you have decisions being made with that time frame in mind, it makes it incredibly hard to deliver, corridors and infrastructure that, have longer time frames. So, yeah, that's probably the biggest challenge.
And you mentioned the single articulated buses that they're doing. Where was that?
Belfast is the example we use, yeah.
So are there other things that we could be learning from other cities, whether it be other Australian cities or other international cities? What are some of the key things we could maybe learn?
I mean, so absolutely. I think we kind of, in this part of the world, we assume the challenges we're facing are unique to us when they're not. And I guess we tend to, from my observations, we tend to not look beyond for examples of how we could do things. So, yeah, we've got the Belfast glider that we use as an example of what could be done for the bus network. Look, even a good example, so South Korea, Seoul, so they totally redesigned their bus network and it's now performing extremely well. And so, but if you were to bring an example like that to say, well, this is how, let's look at this as an example. It's like, well, we're not Seoul. It's like, well, we're not, but the principles are the same, right? You've got a bus network. How can we redesign it to make it, as legible and optimize its efficiency and compete with private vehicles? They're the sorts of things we should be looking at, similar to, Amsterdam and active transport. The common response is, well, we're not Amsterdam. So, well, we're not, but the principles are the same, right? So what can we do to improve, these aspects? And I think the answers are out there. It's just we tend to we tend to think our challenges are unique to us when it's not really that way.
All right, well, I'm going to finish off with a rapid-fire set of questions. So, most underrated public transport project in Greater Brisbane?
The new train model or trains being developed aren't talked about, so the new rolling stock.
Okay. Most overrated?
This is a catch-22, but Brisbane Metro. And only in the sense that it is, so 2 routes, and it's effectively the design. It's just a new vehicle. It's a great vehicle, but it's been talked up a lot. So I think it is fantastic, and I think it's done wonders for the network, but it's essentially a vehicle, right? It's a big bus.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the one that comes to mind.
All right. Biggest misconception about public transport planning?
Well, that public transport is for people who don't have money. Basically. So I think there's still this, I guess, view that if you use public transport it's because you can't drive or you don't have a car or you have to use it. Whereas I think, we should really look at it as, this is the best way for you to get around. So it's still seen as, I guess, a compromise rather than what should be the expectation.
Yeah. And one transport reform you'd implement tomorrow if you could?
Well, I'd love to see the Metro Glider concept get up. I would like... that's such a tricky one, so I don't want to be too controversial here. But yeah, I would like to see a redesign of the bus network. So not just dabbling at the edges. I would like to see the Brisbane Metro get just full priority on the dedicated busways. I'd like to see the whole network be redesigned to be more legible and intuitive to enable someone from the north side to be confident to go to the south side and then catch a bus somewhere. I would love to see the North Brisbane busway be fully dedicated. The whole corridor would be great, which I think there's a business case underway, so I was hoping for something fantastic there. But yeah, it would be a redesign of the whole bus network across Southeast Queensland, not just LGAs, across the whole Southeast Queensland into one network.
Yeah. All right, well, that's it. You can relax.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for sharing your insight.
No problem. Hopefully it made sense. Wasn't too controversial, I don't think.
Yeah. All right, thanks.
No, I appreciate your time. Thanks for having me.
Likewise.